Welcome back to Update Day in Old School, and today we have some massive sailing changes to talk about. Now, regardless of all of today's changes, you can still expect a ton of changes coming to sailing in the future. There will also be an opinion survey going out touching on some of these more specific subjects, things like ship combat, deep sea trawling, XP rates overall, drop rates of some of the items, some pain point problems, and then ultimately some Iron Man concerns into unique drops and upgrades for your ships. Overall, they know there are still a ton of ways they can improve sailing, and they're really looking to find the best route to do so. Now, lastly, before we jump into the nitty-gritty changes of today's update, one thing I do want to highlight is as of today's update, you are now able to lamp sailing, and you'll be able to use your tiers of Guthics on it. One small change that I do think is going to be overshadowed by all of the changes we're about to talk about. Now, first things first, the elephant in the room, we have the Crystal Extractor. If you didn't already have it, the Extractor is essentially an item you could place on your boat that every 60 seconds you would be able to generate a wind note, and by harvesting it, you would get 600 XP, equating to an additional 34k XP an hour, just collecting these wind notes doing nothing else. Now obviously you were doing this in combination with some other type of sailing method, whether it was salvaging or just using it for the Barracuda trials, but nonetheless it was a massive buff to your XP rates an hour with very little additional effort. So in order to combat this, the wind note harvesting has now been reduced from 600 down to 250 XP, essentially taking the Crystal Extractor from a 34k an hour additional method down to 14k, overall resulting in a 20k XP nerf to the Extractor itself. Now, one other change they've made alongside of this that is a slight improvement is the Crystal Extractor will now allow you to generate charges even while you're at the port. But moving on to our next category, we have Port Task, which in my opinion definitely needed some love, so I'm happy that we're taking a step in the right direction here. And they will be increasing the XP rates for completion of all courier tasks from level 40 and above by roughly 15%. Primarily, they want the Port Task to shine a little better in the level ranges between the Barracuda trials, things like 40 to 55 and 60 to 70, but also making them a better, more laid-back option for players in the 90s. Once you fully upgraded your ship to actually be able to get some decent viable XP rates. Now they have stated that currently they won't be making any XP changes to the bounty task, and this is for a couple reasons. One, because they want them to be a nice excuse to go out and obtain the uniques, but also because they think ship combat isn't in the best state right now and they need to do an overall wider review before they adjust these rates. Deep sea trawling isn't something they're making any big adjustments to this week. They do state they want this to be more of a lower XP an hour method with a much better money-making option, but at the same time they understand that it isn't a good enough XP reward in terms of how much intensity you have to output. But now for probably the biggest changes this week, we have the Shipwreck salvaging, or the AFK training method for sailing. Now the ultimate cause of concern was the method of using two crewmates to salvage on both individual hooks, while you being the one to just continuously self-sort your loot, ultimately resulting in being one of the best AFK training methods in the game, when you'd be able to couple this with the additional XP from collecting the Crystal Extractor. Their goal is to make the top end estimate of AFK salvaging to roughly top out similar to that of Redwood woodcutting, around the 80 to 90k an hour XP rate, but at the same time they're also going to improve the output of the high intensity salvaging methods, so it is a little more viable and can compete with that of the Barracuda trials late game. Now, a couple quick changes. Crewmates will now remember their assigned task over logouts. Crewmates and players will now salvage at the same rate. Jolly Jim's deckhandedness has been increased to 4, so now you'll have 2 crewmates that can use dragon salvaging hooks. Now lastly, they'll be adding more of the double salvage spots to every shipwreck, and they'll make these double spots a little easier to access and orient yourself rather than getting stuck more frequently. Now for the impact of the XP changes. Salvaging will now be a 5-tick cycle rather than a 4-tick cycle, but in order to combat that, some of the success rates of salvaging have been massively jumped. So now you'll be able to AFK a little bit longer, but to keep the XP rates in check, you will now have a better chance of success per salvage. Small shipwrecks jump by 11%, fishermen by 14%, Barracuda shipwrecks by 15%, large by 16%, pirate by 21%, mercenary by 18%, and then Fremenic and Merchant anywhere from 16 to 21 and 16 to 22%. In addition to the additional success rates, they'll also be buffing the XP from actually salvaging yourself on the high tier shipwrecks. Pirates will now give 76 XP per salvage instead of 63, Mercenary 138 instead of 127, Fremenic 162 instead of 150, and then lastly Merchant 200 instead of 190. But now the big kicker for what is going to cause probably the biggest change in XP rates and methods. So with today's changes, there are some big nerfs to the XP you'll receive from sorting your salvage. There are slight nerfs to the first early game salvage, things like Barracuda, down from 15.5 to 13. And honestly, I don't know if there was even much of a benefit of changing these first couple. Using the appropriate hooks you have unlocked, the rates really aren't anything to look at. Large salvage will be nerfed from 24 down to 20, pirate from 31.5 down to 26. But now for the big kicker, the final 3 salvage spots. Sorting Mercenary salvage has been nerfed down from 63.5 to 30 XP, cutting it by more than half the XP rates. Fremennik are down from 75 to 32, and Merchant down from 95 all the way to 34. In terms of an oversimplification, they think their estimates bring this down for a 20 to 30% nerf for AFK salvaging once you've passed the level 35 shipwrecks. But you combine this with the high intensity method of having a slower salvaging hook but a higher success rate, they think this also brings it to around a 20% buff to the high intensity methods. Unfortunately, once again, this is one of those things where if you weren't able to take advantage of it early, it's not something you're going to be able to take advantage of anymore. But ultimately, they feel this is the best direction for the long-term health of the skill in general. Now lastly, for a side note, they did fix the Horizons lure when it was incorrectly not applying the XP boost to some of the activities below. And then the last thing included for this week's update, we have all of the sailing drop rates. If you scroll down, you'll see there are a ton of potential uniques that you can get from sailing, and here is some of the drop rates on how you would do so, depending on what kind of items you're trying to get and what method you're using to get them. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I will link the update blog down in the description below if there is a specific one you are looking for. But with that, that'll do it for today's video. Those are all of the updates for the sailing XP rates you need to know. If you guys did enjoy or found the video helpful, consider dropping a like, and I will catch you guys in the next one.